The Portfolio Composer, episode 203.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach, Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
You are going to have to drive people to Patreon because Patreon's not necessarily going to do it themselves, and that's not you can go onto Patreon and you can search, and you can do a search for people who are doing similar things, but ultimately you have to be the one that drives them to that.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Just released, Dorico Pro 2 is a major new version, including features for musicians working in film and TV music and in jazz, rock, and pop. Steinberg have also released Dorico Elements, a new entry-level application that packs all of the essential power of Dorico Pro into a simple, streamlined package that is ideal for those getting started. Find out more later in the show. Hello and welcome to the Portfolio Composer. My name is Garrett Hope, and I'm so glad you're joining us today. I often get asked a lot whether Patreon is a good fit for a composer, and how does it work, and what is it about? So I thought I would put together this episode, and we're doing something a little bit different. I am speaking with two different composers who are very active on Patreon and are building their businesses and supporting the work that they're doing through gathering an audience who are willing to pay money for them. I'm going to let them describe how Patreon works and exactly what it is and how they're using it so you can decide if it's a good fit for you too. The first guest is Chrysanthi Tan, named one of 10 contemporary LGBTQ composers you should know in 2018. Chrysanthi Tan is an autistic composer, violinist, and songwriter who performs electroacoustic Baroque pop incorporating violin, looping pedal, and vocals. As a composer, she writes intimate chamber works incorporating spoken word poetry and elements of Cambodian and Greek folk music. In 2015, Chrysanthi toured the world as Ariana Grande's violinist, and today she co-hosts a podcast called Underscore, produced by Classical KUSC. So in your own words, Chrysanthi, what is Patreon?
Patreon is a platform in which creators can build their personalized membership business, essentially.
Well,
so what was that?
Well, I was going to say, what does that mean? So, and you were, I interrupted you.
It's all good. By membership business, I mean, however you want to call it, like fan club. I mean, it's a way to give back to the people who already are a fan of what you do. And it's a way to have more of a one-to-one exchange, like a value for value type thing, where you can provide them with extra for the exchange of, $1 a month or something. So, depending on how much of a super fan they are, or just how interested in your specific content and your specific behind the scenes they are, or how big their budget is, that can earn them different levels in basically the club. So, I mean, each creator will define what it means for them to have their own club, because that language doesn't, sit with everyone, like fan club. Classical musicians especially don't really think of it like that.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of like that 1,000 true fans thing. Patreon is kind of the end of that chain. Like, if you really like what I do, then become a patron, and then you're going to get like all this behind the scenes and extra stuff, and you're going to really get a glimpse that the public doesn't get.
One of the words you just used was value.
Yes.
And you put it in the context of adding value to your subscribers and your fans. What does that mean for you, and how are you doing that as a composer and a performer?
Good question. For fans, getting value, well, first let me back up and say it's really not intuitive for a musician to think about what they provide as value, because we're so used to people listening to our music, coming to our concert, and then like us thanking them, basically. Like, I don't know how it still takes me a long time for me to accept it sometimes, where people will, write to me and say, thank you so much for that song, like, or for that concert. It really, it's exactly what my holiday season needed, or it's really perked me up, or like it really helped me out, or, it was like the most beautiful part of my day or something. And I think as musicians, we hear that from time to time, and, it might sit with us for like a minute or something. But then when we think, oh, what I do is not valuable, like we don't really consider those things. But any impact that we have on people with our art is value.
Right.
So that's the value. And then it helps to take a step away from ourselves and think more of like, what other famous artists do we love that aren't ourselves? So you can think like a famous artist, okay? Like I am a big fan of the band Arcade Fire. Well, when they came to LA, they were doing this like thing where you could volunteer for them and get like better seats or something. But like, you had to put in a couple hours before the show, like talking to other people and getting them to sign up for this thing. And like it was work. It was like signing up to work basically in order to have the value of, you got to be close to the stage. To me, that's value. So giving fans something extra that they get to see that's unique, or that, they can't get from listening to your song on Spotify or just watching your free YouTube video, or, coming to your concert. So the ways that I provide value that works for my audience, now what works for your audience is going to be different.
Right.
But what works for my audience is I will give downloads of the songs that I listen to. That surprised me, but my patrons did vote that they do like downloads still. So, I'll publicly release a song. They don't have to buy it, or I'll just release a private demo that I'm not going to release because it's not ready, or it's too embarrassing to me and I just want them to hear it. They can download it, and they have a private podcast feed as well. It's called an RSS feed. So in the same way that everyone listening to this is currently listening to this podcast, hopefully they've subscribed to your podcast.
I hope so too.
Then they'll automatically get new episodes in their Portfolio Composer podcast. Well, my patrons have a secret podcast. That's, Chrysanthi's Patreon. And so they get my music directly into their podcast feed. And not only my music, but I also publish like audio journal type things there too. So they'll get like all this behind the scenes on like, I have a show coming up and I'm having that nightmare where I'm not ready, but this time I'm really not ready. And, I'll update you how it goes, or, here are my thoughts on this, or, here's what I really think about pop music, like just kind of stuff that I'm bouncing off, in my head. Cause I do a lot. That's a big part of my value and my brand, is that I'm very like journally, like Dear Diary ish. We also do monthly virtual movie nights. Actually, our January one is tonight. So we pull up a movie on Netflix, press play at the same time, and hang out in a chat room. And, it's a way for people to make friends. And gosh, sometimes I don't even need to be there. My patrons just have so much fun with each other. And there's lots of other ways too. There's sheet music, there's stems packs, for higher patrons, where they get like all the stems to the music.
Wow.
There's a lot of stuff.
So you're actually doing quite a bit to kind of go above and beyond just what you would normally get if you were to support an artist by buying a record or going to a concert. That's the key.
Yes. And you get, a lot more. Like I've had patrons with like financial difficulties, or maybe who are going in and out, and maybe they'll have to change the amount of their pledge level, which is always fine. I never mind that.
Yeah, me too.
But I can remember one patron in particular who had to actually cancel her patronage, but for the whole year where she couldn't be a patron, she was like commenting on every protected post that she couldn't see, being like, I can't wait till I get to be till I can join your Patreon again. And, this, a month or two ago, she finally was like, I'm in a place where I can join it back. She was like, I'm so relieved to be a patron again. I'm so happy I get to like see all this stuff and come to movie nights again. So it is like a different thing.
That's awesome. So you have a real fan. That's great.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Obviously you do. I didn't mean that in a derogatory way. I meant like one of those 1,000 true fans. Like, here's someone who really wants to connect with you on a personal level, loves what you're doing creatively, and wants to support you, actually is going out of their way to make sure they can pay you for your work. And that's what we want as creators.
Mm-hmm.
So congratulations. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it's just, as musicians, I think a lot of us have kind of that opportunity, even if we don't think it's going to be a lot of people. I think it doesn't need to be as many people as you think it does. And so this is one fan who has, financial difficulties, but over the years, she's, supported a Kickstarter. She's been my patron. Patrons get discounts on merch. So she's bought like 3-4 shirts. She's, shares everything, she's a true fan.
Yeah. Good news. So how does a creative type, and we're speaking mostly to composers, how do they know if Patreon is going to be a good fit for them and what they're doing?
Ooh, great question, because I don't think it's for everyone.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think it really depends on, first, someone's fan base, who their, by fan base, I just mean who their audience is, because you have to think, will your audience become a patron, or is there room in what you do where it would make sense for someone to join your Patreon? So for example, I would not use Patreon if you don't do any sort of regular content. By regular, I mean frequent, because Patreon is run as either, the most common way to set it up is per monthly charge. So then your patrons will get charged, once a month for whatever fee they choose, $1, $3, it depends on what tiers you've set up. The other way is to do it is by project, but that is really not done as much, I have to say. That is definitely an option, but it gets hard to track. I will disclose that I started out doing mine per project, but I started getting so stressed about what I defined as a project, and if this thing was big enough to be called a project, or it got really stressful for me, and it was just easier for me to change to monthly and just post a lot more, and
that makes sense.
Even things in progress. So then I also wouldn't recommend Patreon if you if you have unrealistic expectations.
And what might be some unrealistic expectations?
Joining Patreon and thinking, oh my gosh, this is the answer. Because in a lot of ways it is the answer, but it's not as easy as one would say. And I don't want to say I made this mistake myself, but it was a lot harder than I expected. I kind of thought, I'm not even going to lie. Like, I thought at the time I joined Patreon, which was at the end of 2015, I had as many followers as I've ever had. I had just come off of a major pop tour with Ariana Grande. I had just released my first album. I easily raised $11,000 on my Kickstarter for my album. I kind of was like, wow, if even just like a fraction of my thousands of Instagram followers became, God, if only a fraction of my fans became my patrons, that would completely change my life. Well, guess what? It doesn't just happen like that.
No, it doesn't.
You realize the funnel is very different. And just because you have 15,000, Instagram followers doesn't mean even 150 of them will become patrons. That was before I learned about business fun, customer acquisition. Is that what it's called? Customer acquisition.
Acquisition.
Yep. That's what it is. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Onboarding and then retention.
Where it's okay, Yeah, where it's like, okay, maybe someone likes what you do. Maybe they like you enough to stream you. Maybe they like you enough to then add you to a playlist. Maybe they then like you enough to sign up for your newsletter. But the funnel to become a patron and to actually give $1 is actually a much bigger leap than we would think. We think it's just $1, but to a person, that's an extra recurring dollar per month actually is a big deal because it's the mental commitment of it. It really is a big deal. That's why I don't take it lightly when someone becomes a $1 patron. I'm like, wow, that's commitment.
Yeah, I celebrate that too. And I was a little bit like you when I signed up for Patreon. I thought, okay, I've got a following, I've got some fans. If only, 1% of everyone who's downloading were to help, that'd be a big deal. And you look, like I look at Amanda Palmer's Patreon, and she has over 14,000 followers who are giving her money. And even if they're giving her $1 a thing, and that's not true, she has tiers that go up to, let me see here, up to $1,000 per thing. So she's got to have someone up there. And I thought, wow, this is going to be so great. Now I can let go of some of these other projects so I can really invest in this. But it's not that easy.
No. And if you make unrealistic plans and then it doesn't immediately take care of you financially as you think it will, then you'll be very upset and probably demoralized. But I say it's not the time to give up. I think it just means you haven't learned how to do Patreon yet. And maybe your fans haven't learned what it is yet, because that's the other half of it, is because Patreon is still kind of new. I mean, I don't think it's new. I've been on it since 2013 as a patron of other people, but it takes people a long time. And there are still some people that I talk to that do not know what Patreon is at all. Mm-hmm. So it's an education campaign still. That's probably the most annoying part, and the hardest part for me is, like, first I have to do the labor of teaching someone what Patreon is, because it takes a long time for it to click. And, that's not anyone's fault. It's just, that's how it is. It just clicked to me that I just understood what Amazon Prime Now was literally yesterday. And I see ads for it all the time. And I'm just like, shut up. Like, I get it. I don't want to pay for delivery. And it's like, no, if it's a local store, you don't pay for delivery. I didn't understand that until yesterday, even though it's this value, it's this like offer screaming at me in the face.
Right.
My own, one of my best friends told me, like, a year after I started my Patreon, he suddenly became a patron and was like, he was like, I've seen you post about it, but like, I didn't get it until, like, it just clicked right now. I didn't get it.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And it's not, I think this is a good example of not just getting our fans on board with Patreon, but how we get them on board with any creative project we're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say it helps if your fans, or if you have some fans that are digital natives or that know how to know their way around a computer, because that really helps. Another good sign is if your fans are people who are already patrons of other people. And I believe that's probably the number one, like, determining factor of whether a fan will turn into a patron, is if they already have a Patreon account to be patrons of other people. So this is why I really stress that people on Patreon don't think of competition. We're all helping each other. Garrett, if someone is a patron of you, that makes them more likely to be a patron of me, because they've already know what Patreon is.
Yes.
And I don't have to tell them. And it's much easier to just tack on one more person, tack on one more artist, than it is to join from the beginning, remember your password, get into the habit of checking it, so that not every Patreon email will be from me. There'll be some from you, some from me, so that not all their Patreon frustration will go to me, if there is any of that. You know what I mean? Like, it makes me feel better when it's more dispersed. I like to see that people are patrons of a few different people.
Yes, I agree 100%. I don't have anything to add to that. So I kind of want to wrap this up here. Is there anything that you think that those who are on the fence should do as they move forward with this decision, or how they can weigh the pros and cons effectively?
I think if they have a way to contact their fans, I think they can ask, how would you feel if I did this? And not in a tail between legs kind of way, in more of like a, what if I could offer you this much more value and it would be in exchange for this, as I work myself up on there, I'll be able to add more things, but at least for now, like, this is something that would happen. Would you be into it? Then you get people, if you have some people saying yes, then when you launch, they might be more likely to actually follow up with their word. Another thing I would say is to join Patreon yourself, to stalk other people.
Yeah, you could watch a campaign. You don't have to become a patron.
Yeah, you can do what's called follow, and you can follow different people on Patreon. Even I do that sometimes when I'm like, oh, I want to remember this, artist, this band, whatever. I want to remember them. I'm not ready to become a patron yet, but I'm going to scope them out. And then, followers could become patrons later. That just means you get all of their public posts in your email. So yeah, I would say follow. If there is someone that you like on Patreon, become their patron. Not just because it's a good thing to do, but because you'll be able to see from the perspective of being a patron what sorts of things your creator is offering, what you like, what you don't like, and that can help you learn what you might better do with your audience, because experiencing it from the audience, aka patron perspective, is probably the easiest way. When in doubt, I always think, if I were not myself and I were just like a fan of myself or seeing this, which post would I like better? Which would catch my eye more? Think like someone else, not you.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm not supporting you on Patreon, but I watch you from the sidelines. I also see your social media posts, and you are very active and connected with your fans. And that's something that I'm learning how to do a little bit better. So I'm learning a lot from you. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I learn a lot from you too. And also, if anyone listening, has questions about Patreon or something, I open myself up to, the listeners of your podcast, Garrett, to, ask me questions on social media or whatnot. I might be slow in responding if there's a lot, but I'm always happy to help other composers see if this is right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate the offer. Thank you for joining me today and letting me talk to you a little bit more about Patreon. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Garrett.
This episode is sponsored by Dorico, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorico users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorico to make their careers happen.
My name's Dan Kreider. I'm a full-time church musician, so I'm typically making lead sheets is the majority of what I do, but I also arrange for just a diversity of instruments, a lot of instrumentation for full orchestra, sometimes a string group, sometimes next Sunday we're having a brass quartet. It's a pretty active schedule, always writing on deadline, always trying to get it done. Most people have something that they're using, and unless they're really fed up with it, they have a workflow. They're accustomed to it, and they like what they know. And in some cases, they perhaps don't realize what something could be. And that, I think, was my case. I had amassed a huge collection of workarounds and third-party plugins and shortcuts. And I had just become accustomed to thinking that was fine and normal. And it just vaguely started to annoy me that once I had finished the creative part of a score, I knew there were 2 hours ahead of me or so to get it looking like it needed to be. And that's honestly what sort of overcame that original entrenchment. You initially maybe adopt a program because of a particular reason, and then you find there's another reason you hadn't even considered. I initially came to Dorico from Finale only because I was tired of tweaking a score and tired of avoiding collisions. But I had not even considered something like non-destructive writing, and also just the output is bold and strong and feels very personal. Those are things that I was pleasantly surprised at. What I love most about it is that scores look beautiful right out of the box. honestly, that is what I love the most. I can open up the score. I can start entering the notes. I can switch over to engrave mode to check it. I may bump one or two little things, and it's done. I never have to settle for ugly scores again on short notice. I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the development process, and that I think is going to yield the best results in the long run, is that everything is so carefully thought through. In another 6 months to a year, the number of things that Dorico won't do natively is going to be a fraction of what people are going to require of it. There's really no question that I'd recommend it. In fact, I do, and my colleagues give me a kind of a hard time about it, jokingly, because I'm a little bit of an evangelist. I have started offering private tutoring. That's a real interest of mine in helping users, ask questions and evaluate their own workflow and see, okay, there are some other ways that I could really trim down my time and get to the real business, which is making music.
The kind folks at Dorico have set up a special web page so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorico. So go and do that. Have been using the program, and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorico.com/TPC. And now we're going to speak with Theodore Jander. Theodore, or Ted Jander, is a composer of diverse sacred and secular music. He has taken listeners on musical excursions touching upon multiple moods and emotions. His music is infused with authenticity and wit, while his sacred music also evokes a deeply rooted faith. He is composer in residence and worship ministry coordinator at Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd in Hazelwood, Missouri, is artistic director for the Greenleaf Singers, and has launched a unique mission on Patreon called Seasonal Scriptures in Song. So welcome to the Portfolio Composer, Theodore. I'm glad to have you on board.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be on.
You are actively using Patreon, and you and I have spoken quite a bit about it. So I want to give you a chance to just describe what it is you're doing on Patreon as a composer, and then you can tell us what that platform has done for you and your business of writing music.
Okay. With Patreon, I first heard about it through an interview you had done on the Portfolio Composer. So I was very intrigued by what Patreon was. So I looked into it and thought that this was a perfect fit for a project that I was beginning with my church, as a way for me to ultimately go outside of the church that where I work. And the project is Seasonal Scriptures in Song. And what the project is, the mission of the project first is to transform and enrich the daily and faith lives of all people through creative and meaningful songs and musical experiences. And Patreon provides me an opportunity to write a song every month, and those patrons who support me on Patreon then have access to the songs each month. And the songs are scripture. The text for each song is scripture. The songs each month are produced in a lead sheet form that at a certain level, the patrons who are at that level have access to the lead sheets if they want to be able to sing off of or play from, use the scores. The levels that are below that, they have, and everyone has access to recordings that I do, either live video and or audio that I create, then that they can use to hear the finished product, to sing along, to learn the music as well.
As a composer, you've been doing this to build your business. So what has it done for you?
Yes, it's definitely helped me to build my business, especially from the marketing perspective, because yes, I can create on my own. I could create a song every month to be able to use with my church, and we'd use it here. But what Patreon helps me to do is to put it out into the world in a great format, in an easy way, and then it provides people outside of the congregation to access the music, and then to also support. And so with marketing, I'm having to learn how to put that information out there. So each month once a song is completed, yes, all of my patrons receive that access at their level, and then the marketing side of promoting it to people who are not currently patrons. It is a slow process because a lot of the connections that I've attempted to make via email, through direct message on Twitter, through Facebook message, I'm promoting on Instagram. Right now it's a lot of social media, and then email. And so it's just it's making that connection, and that's how I'm needing to build the business side of it, because I'm needing to make connections outside of Patreon in order to draw them in. But Patreon is the platform to which they go then to support and be engaged with the business or with the project and what Seasonal Scriptures and Song is.
In what ways has the Patreon platform made this easier for you as a creator?
The main thing is that it's allowed me to put my music into a central location, if you will, and those patrons then, or even non-patrons, it reaches out globally. With a lot of what I was doing originally with any of the music I was doing for my church was all specific to the church, and it was being used here. And this, with Patreon, it's a way for me to put my music out there, and it puts the mission of what I'm doing with Seasonal Scriptures and Song out there. And Patreon is just a great way to be able to do that. It's easy to get into, and the Patreon provides a pretty straightforward means of putting resources or your materials and your resources out into the world.
So it's basically facilitating a lot of the broadcasting part of what you have to do, because it creates a platform for you to say to the world, here's what I'm doing, come join me in it. Would you say that's true?
Oh yeah, for sure. Any other social media advertising, if you will, that I use, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, are the three that I use, it all directs anyone to Patreon. And then once there, and if they become a Patreon patron, then they're able to engage with the music more directly. It's a process too, because with the way Patreon is set up, when I post the release of a song, for somebody who comes in later, they may have to siphon through. Currently, I'm at, let's see, 20 months of posts, and so I'm still learning the process of figuring out how to also then make it easy for those patrons who do come in, how to easily access. So there's that dynamic as well. But yes, it's Patreon has really helped to provide a platform that I direct people to support the project and to support my music.
I know that you can set Patreon up a number of different ways. Like, you can ask your patrons to sponsor you on a monthly basis or on a per project or thing basis. How have you set up your Patreon? I
have it set up that patrons support me monthly. So it's it's per month as opposed to per project. It also, with the per month, what it allows then is for me to have a steadier income stream. And it also keeps me on my toes. I think musically, it takes time, it takes work, and so having that monthly income stream is very helpful, and it's great incentive because I don't want to let my patrons down, and because it's once a month. That's what I've committed to, and they know that from the beginning. That's what they sign up for.
So it helps you maintain a creative schedule. And now you have a substantial body of work. And one of the things that you mentioned to me not too long ago was that you can repurpose this body of work, like selling a song book. Correct. I mean, there's and multiple ways this is helping your career.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's and really one of the biggest ways is the concept of marketing. I had considered once upon a time looking at going into business that was a very short month of thinking that was going to work, because prior to that I was very much interested in music, and turned my focus back onto music, and it was like, business just isn't for me. I just don't really, I'm like, what am I going to do with business? And 25 years later, realizing that a person cannot make a career as a composer or even as a performing musician without some marketing / business background, or not even so much background, but vested time and effort learning how to do it. And that's been one of the things too that's come out of this is, yes, I have the platform in Patreon, which is great, but if people don't know about it, it's not going to do them or me any good. So yes, I have the platform. Now it's a matter of taking that platform and directing people to it. So that's a big part of what that is. So
how did you know that Patreon was the right platform for you?
I had looked at some of the other platforms that tended to be more project based. And when I heard about Patreon and doing the research and looking at what else was out there, the idea of, well, you could do just a per project kind of thing. So it could have been a short term idea, but my goal with this was to make it a long term project, or really to not even so much a project, but to turn it into a business and a very long-term creative endeavor. It has been a very good fit for the way I'm wanting to build seasonal scriptures and song.
For the composer who's considering this, what advice would you give them, or what would you tell them that they should consider?
There are a couple of things, I think. One is you really need to know your audience. Even though with Patreon, you're not necessarily going to use Patreon to build your audience. Ultimately, you should already have an audience to bring. That's one of the things that Patreon isn't necessarily going to do, isn't going to build the audience for you. And that's again where, if I'm not putting, for me, or if you're not putting the word out there that this is where someone can go to access your music or to support you, they're not going to know about it. So, and you work from the audience that you have, and then you go through the other means to really build your audience, whether it's email lists, emailing, whatever social media that you're building, but knowing not only your audience, but what are they going to get out of it? What's the benefit to your audience? Because that's going to be presented when you go onto Patreon. And it's similar for the other platforms as well, is knowing what's in it for the patrons. What are they going to get out of it? For me, it was I started the project in March 2017, and over a year later was still editing and revamping just the way the information is presented. So knowing that you're going to have to do that, I mean, unless you can present it exactly the way, I mean, take the time to research, to know, like I've said number of times, know your audience, know what the benefits are going to be, know how, if this is going to be a project, and if it's going to be project based, or you're looking to create a monthly income, knowing that you're committing to creating something every month, and whether or not you can do that. And know too that you are going to have to drive people to Patreon, because Patreon's not necessarily going to do it themselves. And that's not you can go onto Patreon and you can search, and you can do a search for people who are doing similar things, but ultimately you have to be the one that drives them to that.
Yeah, this has been great. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Other than, I think more of us need to use something like Patreon. I think it's a great way to create an additional, if not primary, income stream. I'm realizing that Patreon isn't the only way that the business is going to grow. Like you and I have talked about, there are other options that I'm going to need to consider for growing my business, but Patreon it's a great place to start. Patreon they're supportive. The materials that they provide, they make it easy to set up and to begin the process, and really just to enjoy the ride of doing that. I think it's great.
Excellent. Ted, thank you so much for joining me on the Portfolio Composer today and to talk about scriptural, oh my gosh, I can't get it right. Help me out.
Seasonal scriptures and song.
Seasonal scriptures
yeah,
and song.
It's kind of... Yeah, it's seasonal scriptures and song, or as my fiance, when we're talking about it, or I'm at work, it's S cubed.
S cubed. That's great. I love that.
S-cubed.
Sorry,
So,
now
yeah.
I'm mortified and deeply
okay.
embarrassed. But I'm really I'm impressed by the effort you're putting into this, and I know you're working really hard and you think about it daily because you do have the long view. I know this because you and I have had many conversations about it, and you're trying to make this into a legit way to not just make your art and be active as a creator, but to serve the people that are in your audience. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorico, the music notation software from Steinberg. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games, Dorico is the tool for you. Dorico comes in two versions: Dorico Pro for professionals, and Dorico Elements, providing the perfect introduction to the world of scoring. Whichever version you choose, you'll be using software packed full of smart features that produces beautiful results completely automatically, allowing you to get music on the stand more quickly than with any other software. You can bring music into Dorico from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI, and you can try Dorico out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorico.com/TPC. Try it today.